Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, as it is, for David joining us from the other side of the world. Thank you very much for joining us for our next edition of Bytes. We are talking about programming for film and TV. And joining me on the panel, we've got three programmer extraordinaires, David Kane, Colin Wood, and Mark Lorenz. So I'll hand over to you each individually. Mark, you're front and center on my screen, so I'll start with you.
All right.
Hello, welcome. Thank you for joining us. If you just want to say a little bit about who you are, what you do, that'd be great.
Hi, I'm Mark. I'm one of the high-end systems ETC trainers for HOG4, also in Germany. Doing a lot of trainings and trade show stuff, but I'm not doing this. I'm also working more and more in the event industry nowadays. Also doing a lot of touring and music stuff. Before that, I was doing a lot of TV shows as one of two operators. We always split a little bit up into one guy is doing show lighting, one guy is doing the key lighting stuff, but I did both of that stuff for large-scale TV shows. So quite a long-term experience in all types of shows, and I'm into this industry now for more than 30 years right now. So yeah, quite a long time in front of all types of consoles. I started with back in the days with a Scan Commander. No, actually the first console was a Pulsar Rock Desk. Then from that on to A24, then a Scan Commander, and then on to HOG2, and obviously I'm staying with HOG since then.
Brilliant. Well, thank you. Thank you.
And don't wonder if I'm muted or some people passing by. I actually had to jump into a game right now, so I'm actually sitting in front of a console running a little show. So, but it's an easy one, so I could join.
Brilliant. Well, thank you for taking the time to join us. David, you're next on my screen. I'll come across to you.
Hello. Thanks for having me. My name is David Kane, and I also have terrible internet where I am. So if I get choppy or whatever, I may end up turning off my video. But lighting programmer. I have programmed all sorts of programs, narrative, single camera features, TV. Do a lot of high-end commercials. Spent a stint in variety television. I started as an electrician in a DP, and kind of ended up here as a programmer. I've been with EOS since the very beginning. So some of you may know me. I'm a EOS console trainer. I do a lot of the high-end EOS trainings. High-end is a more advanced topic. I took a HOG class once. I don't remember much of it. Sorry. And I'm currently in New Zealand, where it is 5:30 in the morning, working on Cowboy Bebop for Netflix.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thanks for getting up before dawn has cracked. Colin, you're next on my screen.
Right. So yeah, I'm Colin Wood. Like Mark, also a HOG trainer here in the UK. Also assist with some support for HOGs. But way before I was doing all of that, I started off working in the industry on cruise ships. And for quite a long period of time, I was sort of a mix of designing shows on cruise ships and also programming shows, which I feel is a background that sort of has really set me up in the path that I've taken. Is a lot of the shows that I do find myself designing and programming at the same time, which can be really lovely. It can also be horrible in that you're completely on your own at times. But that cruise ship background really sort of set me on a path. And I did that for about 10 years or so, where I was just bobbing around in the ocean a lot. And that's where I got to know the HOGs as well. It was the first console, besides, a bit of dabbling before all of that with some Strands and some 088 consoles. When I really got going with programming, it was on HOG2s, then into HOG3s, and obviously there was a natural progression from there into HOG4. But in sort of later years, I've moved away from that. I made a conscious decision that I didn't want to be traveling away so much, because after the cruise ships, I then was doing a lot of touring theatre, living out of a suitcase, traveling all over the place. I was lighting shows out in Asia, and did some Hong Kong, New Zealand, all over the place. And At the same time, I had just got married. We wanted to start a family, and it just didn't gel. I know a huge amount of people who make it work. It wasn't feeling comfortable for me, and I did make a conscious decision to try and keep myself at home a little bit more. The training that I started doing really fell into place nicely. The console rental business as well, all of that allowed me to be at home more. And I started gravitating away a little bit from the theatre world, more into the corporate and TV world, where I'll still be away from home, but shorter chunks. And it worked much, much better with family life. So that's where I am now, really, is still doing hog trainings, doing some theatre shows, but more and more TV shows.
Cool, brilliant. And Kat, I can see you in my window, so I'm going to call you out as well since you're here.
Oh no. So I'm Kat. I actually work for ETC, helping with all the marketing activities, so training, trade shows, events mainly. So I'm just here to be nosy, to sit in on the action as well.
Cool. And in case anyone hasn't met me or come across me yet, that's probably lucky for you. My name is Declan. I'm the training program coordinator for ETC. So, we're here to talk about programming for film and TV. And I think it's fair to say that everyone sort of had some background in theatre before moving into other into the other industries. And as a question for everyone, how do you find that transition? I think with the industry being the way it's been this past year, I think a lot of more people are going to start looking to expand horizons with the Netflixes and the Amazons and all these other independent studios that are starting to come up. I think there is hopefully more and more work coming in those areas, and I think people are going to want to start transitioning. Tell us a little bit about how what that's like, how you sort of make the shift from one world into the other. I don't know if anybody wants to go first, or if I'll just sort of point and click and sort of drop someone in it.
I don't mind kicking it off.
Great.
I mean, I'm forever jumping back and forth. Well, in an ordinary, when things are in normal times, jumping back and forth between musical theatre shows and the TV world. And one big difference that I would say is that theatre is very linear. And in TV, you can be just jumping around all the time. You cannot just assume that a TV show is going to go from point A to point B in a straight line. You can assume that with putting together a piece of musical theatre. So the approach to programming has to be very different. You have to be a lot more flexible. You need to be able to jump around freely and not feel, oh no, I can't go to that now because it's going to, I can't get to that point in the show because it's going to make a huge mess. In a theatre world, you're going to go key 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and it'll all flow nicely. So I would sort of kick off this discussion with saying that it's a very, very different approach to the programming, and always program in a way that you can freely jump around without tying yourself up in a knot.
So you sort of do less sort of cue list sort of structure and more sort of fader based work, is that?
I frequently find that I do end up with a cue list, but it won't be a cue list that's full of values, but more a cue list that will have lots of triggers to trigger other playbacks on the console. So, if it's a game show, for example, and we've got lots of in and outs of parts, I'll keep that as part of a cue list, but I know that all it's doing, when I hit go, all it's doing is triggering another cue list on the console, which if I need it at any point, it's right there in front of me and I can just hit the button for it. I don't have to think, go to Q20. If it's right there and they say we're going to an end of part, boom, hit the button. I wouldn't have that in a theatre show. I wouldn't just have the ability to suddenly go to another scene on one button on the desk. I'd expect that I'm going to play through it. Otherwise, the actors are going to have a bit of a hard time as well. So that's sort of the different viewpoint that I would take with a TV show.
David, how about you?
I have never done a day of theater in my life. And I think I'm going to get pushback from everyone in here who does theater, including, my wife, who has told me I should do a musical theater show just for fun. I cannot imagine a world in which I have the luxury to look at something for that length of time. Tech is never something I've had. Be able to sit in a room and finesse an effect and get that timing transition just right. It's like, if you're not still typing when it's rolling, you've got a very laid back cameraman and gaffer. So I would agree with Colin as far as, I think the structure of how you set up the show depends on the type of project that you're on. Certainly for like variety television, game shows, live event television, right? Your America's Got Talents and your music shows, your award shows. You do a fair amount of triggering. You still have a cue list, but yeah, you can be prepared to, basically, as it was explained to me, you're building a show out of sequence that you're never going to see until it airs, and then it plays back linearly. But if you're doing something narrative, right, like a feature or a narrative TV show, I do end up with a cue list full of values, and part of that is because part of our job in the narrative world is record keeping. Part of our job is when they come back in 3 weeks to do pickups and say, hey, we're going back. Remember that scene where he was on the couch and it's talking to her and we were doing this, and you're gonna be like, oh yeah, it was this scene. And you have to be able to call that up instantly. And if you end up with a bunch of triggers and handles and stuff, at least in that world, it can become very messy. So it very much depends on what you're doing. And then you end up debusking values on top of that. As he walks forward, he's going to want to fade this light up. And of course you have that on the handle and stuff like that. But being able to archive that, not just for yourself, but on the show I'm on right now, there's a fair amount of second unit, there's a fair amount of that stuff, and be able to hand that show file off and say, cool, here you go, here's everything in a nice package. And then have them come back and say, cool, we're going to do scene 10713 alpha, and they can call that up by shot number, and it just comes back as it was shot. That's a very important aspect of the narrative world, to be able to do that. Be able to do that as well. So protecting your, how do you work with tracking? How do you structure your data? How do you store stuff to make it easy on yourself, but also make it so that you don't accidentally track something backwards into something you've already shot where you may not want it to? Or do you want to do that? And so there's a lot of considerations like that. So it definitely depends on the type of television show that you're doing, whether you structure it up like what Colin was saying, or kind of more. It's not linear by any stretch of the imagination, but it's record keeping. It's keeping a moment in time kind of baked in there.
Oh, Mark, how about you?
So for me, I'm the lucky person, I think, now in this trio, because I have mostly done like those linear shows, because I did a lot of live TV stuff, which has been mostly like event shows and musical shows where you have like a fully structured thing, where the only thing which might be out of the linear way happening is the rehearsals. But then my shows, which I mostly did, they go on live, and you have like a fully script running through. I find myself always organizing them with a lot of pages, so that I have like one basic page which I use as like a template page, where I have some basic looks which can bring me back also for safety reasons when I'm live into a specific look which is defined. And life is life. Sometimes there are things happening which are not scripted in some way, and this is something that I always have on my hand there. Some have some basic looks, and then I always have like, for each act which is happening, I have like a one page, and the last look on that list or in that page where when I start programming, I always take the last look I have there on that page, and I copy that over, take all the data into the programmer and copy this data over, and this is the first cue on my next page for the next act which is happening, so that the transition from one page to the next one is totally fluent and not be seen. So, and with that, I also can jump during rehearsals. I also can jump from, okay, let's say now we have musical act 1, and now we jump to musical act 3, and I also can be sure that I have the exact same look without running through the whole cue list in between, and also make changes then only once or twice, because I need to tweak maybe just 2 cues and still have the options to jump between those cues instead of using one long queue list with 300, 500 queues or whatever. So I split that up into these things. So I'm not in so much like in those non-linear TV show stuff. So I'm probably the luckiest one of us.
I mean, the one thing that's been consistent with everyone is you've all made a point of how data management is absolutely critical to what you're doing. And, you know, I think, you know, primarily with a theatre background, it's easier because I am working in a linear fashion. So keeping track of something is a whole lot easier. What sort of systems do you put in place for yourself to help you sort of manage that data? Because if, like you say, once the show's running for you, Mark, it's in a linear order, but your rehearsals may not be. So how do you manage what you're updating in this look to make sure that it doesn't have a knock-on effect, that's something that's either been teched or something that's still about to happen?
I quite often use help myself with copying cue lists or doubling cue lists for some stuff. Or also a lot during rehearsals, parking stuff away, and then just be sure that this is not touched. I still can edit cues then, but it's not affecting the output at that moment. Most of the times I'm lucky that I can do a lot of stuff in pre-programming already. So I'm quite, when I'm on the real set, I'm already in a state where I can work with the real set, and which is nice. So I'm quite good there.
Okay.
So it's a lot more like organizing how I find my pages organized, keeping my presets safe. I have sometimes more presets than I actually need. Sometimes I copy presets for specific songs, even if I don't know if I need to alter them later on. It's still the same look. It might be my stage wash. I just make a copy for that and make stage wash song 2. And it looks actually the same, but I then can be sure I just update for that specific song, but I know it's the same stage wash. But then when I in song 2, I only update that specific preset. So that also keeps me helps me a lot when keeping track of my data.
David, how about you? Because I know EOS deals with tracking in a slightly different way to Hog. And do you find that you work in tracking world, or are you more in queue only world on your TV stuff?
You know, it's interesting. Actually, the show I'm on right now, I think, don't kick me out of here, but the show I'm on right now in New Zealand is actually on Random A. So and they deal with tracking very differently as well. So it's interesting to watch what all the desks do and how they handle it differently and how you approach a show differently based on how much it wants to track, how good its queue only is. You know, like EOS queue only is very different than like MA queue only. Right. And MA queue only I found will screw you, whereas EOS queue only will save you. And it just depends on what you're doing. I think that a lot, if I'm in something like, I'm in queue only a lot of the time on EOS because, a lot of times you just don't want to, you don't want to change something. A lot of times what I find a lot, especially in narrative, it sounds like we've got the live event television section of the market covered pretty well. So I'll leave that to Mark and Colin, but for narrative, the number of times I've gotten like, cool, we're going to set a look. Yeah, great, all right, cool, ready to go. And like, oh yeah, but before this, and this happens. And you're like, oh, like, okay, so we're working backwards, no problem. But then, so you have your final end point, and now you have to work backwards to get to your beginning point. And you obviously don't want to change stuff at your final mark. So trying to remember, like, it's easier for me to work in queue only and then use the track button to move stuff forward than it is to remember every time I'm updating something before, and inserting a queue before to use queue only or always use proper blocking and stuff like that. Because a lot of times you're moving pretty fast and you don't have time to always think of the tracking implications. A lot of updating through queue ranges and stuff like that. But I'll be in queue only most of the time for narrative, and that is actually a testament to how strong EOS's queue only is versus how other desks that I've experienced deal with queue only, which isn't bad, it's just different.
Right. Colin, how do you find your sort of data management process?
I've had a long time to sit here and think about this. I'm struggling. It's kind of something this may seem a really feeble answer. it's something I do, and I'm struggling to put into words what I do. So, you know, and that sounds really, really lame. I can hear it coming out of my mouth. For example, if between one episode and another episode of a TV show, I know that they're not going to, you know, once we start into episode 2 of the sorts of shows I do, we're never going back to number 1. The players have gone home. You know, we're not going to do pickups for that. They've gone home. We're kind of good. We'll have done all of that, and it's a sealed. You know, one day this approach may shoot me in the foot, but up to this point, we've been good. Once we've wrapped an episode in sort of my world, that's done. And I'll copy that list, and that will be my start point for the next episode. So I've always got it in the bag there if the worst comes to the worst, but I copy it and away we go. I've got a new list for episode 2. But like I say, there are times when I'm triggering something else on the console. Well, if I then go and edit that, obviously there would be a knock-on effect if I ever went back to that previous list. If that's getting triggered, it's going to get triggered in its new form. So that is something that is always in the back of my mind, and is something that I need to be careful about. But in a world where once we've wrapped that program, or maybe it's gone out live, you know, we're not expecting to go back to that. So it's not at that point a massive concern. But I've always got the option, of course, to grab everything and block to a queue. You know, if I say I have put together a queue list which is triggering other things on the console, doesn't mean that I can't put values into those queues. And there have been many a time where I have, you know, and I've gone, you know, this can never change. We block this right now. The next few queues might be triggering those few lists over there, but this queue cannot ever look any different. And, you know, so I don't know if that helps anyone at all, but that's my approach anyway. It's in the world, as I say, everybody's worlds and everybody's types of shows require a different approach to this. And some require a much more, like what David was saying, I can fully appreciate. You need to know if it's a week later or a month later, if there's something has occurred and you go back and reshoot that, it's got to look exactly the same. And you've got to really be very careful to ensure that is the case. In my world, I probably have a little more leeway.
What's interesting, Colin, about sorry.
No, carry on.
What's interesting, Colin, about the the different, you do a lot of it's something a lot of live or linear sort of, not necessarily a talk show, but weekly sort of stuff, episodic multi-camera sort of stuff.
The sorts of things I end up on tend to be chat shows, game shows, and that sort of thing.
Yeah, it's interesting working with people who, I'll work with a lot of times people who aren't used to working with programmers, aren't used to working with programmers in the capacity that I tend to work, which is a very active, very hands-on, very engaged, very opinionated programmer. But it's, what's interesting about triggering a whole bunch of stuff is I find when I recall a look, I can't be wrong. And not because it can be oh, give me a second, let me reset that. It's because they inherently don't understand necessarily what's going on. So you can have it recalled perfectly and that's not what we had. You're I promise you, this is exactly what they're had. And it's not. It's it's a computer, man. I don't know what to tell you. It just stores the numbers. This is literally what we had. So that's another reason to kind of encapsulate that, is that building of confidence is this is baked. We have minimized the variables to bring this back, so that when I inevitably get that's not what we had when we shot this, and you're it is.
Pretty is.
It is.
We have a question come in that I want to pass back to you, David, while we're on this topic. Can you explain what you mean, or go into a bit more detail about the differences between MA and EOS and Q only, where it's sort of different?
I mean, do we want to get into that? I'm happy to talk about it, but I feel that's all another conversation, or I'm happy to talk about it at the end. I feel that's it's every desk is different. We can sit here and have the difference between HOG and EOS conversation and how all that works, and I'm happy to have that conversation. I just feel it takes us to a place we may not want to go with this conversation.
No, that's absolutely fine. No, we can certainly just want to say if there was something specific. Yeah, brilliant. The other question is, while we're talking about repeatability, is how do you ensure that the rig is correct when you return for the next show in a series, or return to the studio? Because surely, you know, I mean, there's so in addition to the programming side of things, there's a variable there in terms of where the fixtures are and how that's been placed. Do you have any control over that, or is that sort of a whole other department? I mean, do you ever need to engage when that sort of thing happens? Does it happen?
I mean, everything gets drawn, everything gets plotted. In narrative world, again, which is kind of the corner of the market I'm going to talk about here, because everything else seems to be covered. You know, there's either I'm drawing it in Vectorworks, or we have a draftsman, depending on the budget of the show. And you pretty much, your plots are as built. Like occasionally you'll have like, oh, cool, here's more or less what we want to do, but it's all going to change. You end up with builds, and that ends up being like, cool, we're going back to the show, like, here's the drawing, here's the number, and there's a rigging crew that comes in and makes sure that stuff's in the same spot. Obviously, I can't, you know, if they have completely torn it out, I have no control over the focus of that conventional over there. But, you know, I can say at least the values and the colors are correct. And, you know, I think it's a lot easier for cameramen and gaffers who aren't used to working with consoles to understand that a light focus might need to be retouched than, you know, the data goes into the magical black box and it has gotten eaten and it comes out and it's not the same for whatever reason it would get changed in that magical black box. Everyone's pretty understanding that, but there are as built, and there's typically there's a rigging crew that'll go in and make sure stuff. And there's a programmer, like, on my show right now, you know, we have a whole systems team and a rigging programmer and a separate second unit programmer. And the rigging programmer's job is, you know, they go in there and they make sure that everything works and they make sure that everything's in the right place. And, you know, they'll actually build my magic sheets or my layout views for me so I can come in. You know, the rigging crew comes in and they cook the meal, and then we come in and eat the meal, and they come in and clean up the dishes. And that's kind of the way it goes. This is just parsed out.
Cool. Again, question for everyone on the panel. Do you have a base file that you always start from? Do you start from scratch every time and build up specifically for each show? But if so, and obviously I'm not talking about things that was sort of regular jobs for you, but if someone picked up the phone and says, hey, we're doing this thing, see you on Monday, what do you take with you to that shoot, to that?
So I don't have a real base show file because I tend to prepare my shows really for show, because I find it much better, because the needs or the stuff I need for each show is different. So if I do a live television music show with a lot of music acts, I need different stuff than when I'm just doing key lighting or whatever. So what I do is I try to at least prep myself at home, have a patch ready, patch show file ready with some basic groups, some basic palettes inside, which I can do without having the main fixtures. It's just like adding blank palettes with some values inside, which I then can edit when I'm on site. But this already gives me a good starting point when I'm on site, that I can take with my tech crew, with my lighting crew chief, and say, run through the rig. Okay, are the groups correct? Is the numbering correct? And all that stuff. So this is what I tend to do when I'm home, and also make sure that all libraries are there and all that stuff. So I'm not a big fan of a preset starting show file.
Colin, how about you?
I can only echo what Mark said, really. It's the same approach for me. Every show that I end up working on it tends to be so vastly different. I mean, obviously there are some similar TV shows, but very often I may well be sent a show file from a previous series, and you know that will be my start show file for that particular series. But you know, between whether it be theatre or the corporate world, you know, it's always so vastly different that I've never ended up going down that road of having the base show file. Now, I tend to find that it's something that's a lot more common in sort of the festival kind of scene, where people are constantly touring around with an artist, and they very much have their base show file. They have got a library of hundreds of songs that they have built up over years, and they're not going to want to start a new tour with a brand new show file and rebuild all of that. They want to make that work with a new rig. But But if I'm sitting down and doing a show that's going to run, it might be a theatre show, but if it's a corporate event, it's may happen for a night or over 2 or 3 nights, or a TV show that's may shoot for 12 episodes or something like that. It's going to be so vastly different from any other show that I'll quite happily start a new show, and like Mark says, I'll prepare some things in advance, but I won't. I will start a new show.
Okay.
It'll be interesting. David's.
Yeah,
I'm the odd man out here. I absolutely have a base show file, and it's built. It's massive and a behemoth, but it's been built to cover the variety TVs of the world. And it's sectioned out into different acts, right? I can punch through, and it's got breakdown to different acts, and I've got it here. We can pull it up later if we want to take a look at it. I don't know if I can do that, but it also works well for me in narrative. It's basically I've spoken about this in other stuff, but you're gonna need to record things. You're gonna need to organize stuff. So my show file is basically an empty set of buckets that's got all laid out already. So I already when I need to record something, I have a preset place to put it. I don't need to worry about numbers or organizational structures. That's all laid out, snapshots. I lug around all my bi-type palettes. So if I've ever seen a light before, I already have the palettes for those fixtures. Because in my world, if I'm coming in to do a commercial, right, it's, unpack the desk, set it up. Okay, cool. Take that light and make it red. No, make it green. No, make it orange. Yeah, cool. Okay, make it a little less orange. Now make it do a figure 8. Great, we're rolling. By the way, we have to do the other thing. Wait a second. There's no time to, hang on, let me build those palettes first and presets to make sure that the colors are right. So I absolutely have that. So at least when they say make it red, I can push a button and something happens. And whether it's the right red for that designer or gaffer, we could adjust from there, but at least it does something. So I absolutely have a very structured show file. Contains a whole bunch of effects. I'll put a fire effect on it. Great. I've got 3 of those that I know work. Put a ballyhoo on it. Put a sine wave chase on it. Put a sine wave chase in a grouping of 4. It's all already built, and I don't have to go into the effects engine to build it every time. If I've built it once, why do I want to build it again? That's kind of my whole philosophy on it. But I can certainly understand why some people would not want to do it that way.
Do you find you are consistent in terms of your numbering? Is that part of your process, that you'll know that colors 1 to 6 are always going to be the same thing, and that's all? Or is your layout more visual, screen wise? So are you more sort of data driven or sort of visual driven in terms of how you set things up?
I tend to have a mixture of things. For example, with colors, I often use the good old lead numbering. So because that's where I started, putting gels in front of some fixtures. So I knew 132 or 106 or whatever. So I can type in color 106 or color 101. I know that it's yellow or red or something like that. So this is sometimes I store stuff like that in there. But I also, during the last years, I tend to go more and more into a visual way of organizing my stuff. With screen estate becoming larger and more options there, it's more and more a graphical way of doing things. With that, the only thing which I try to keep always the same is my numbers, my fixture number, so that I know, okay, this is maybe just because of the way it started. Everything for me is with the good old very lights. So all the 500 numbers are my wash lights, all the 600 numbers are my spots, and so from that on, I put some extra stuff. I tend to always have, if it's possible, try to keep it in the 100 blocks. So, and then have for example, media servers starting with 1,000. So that's how I keep track of doing it mostly all the same. Otherwise, or if there's a lighting plot given by the designer or some, I actually have to go with those numbers. But if I can decide those numbers, this is something I try to do because it's so in my head burned in that everything with a 6 in the beginning is a spot.
Fair enough. Colin, how about you?
Well, again, sort of following on from what Mark was saying there, sort of fixture number wise and everything. Again, in the TV world, I walk through the door and I'm handed a plot, and I'll run with that. You know, I can try and fight it and say, actually, I want to call these something completely different. It's only going to cause confusion down the line somewhere. And so it is a case of, you know, walking in, right, what have we got today, guys? And running with it. And usually I'll find that I'm going in as the rig is going up as well. So I wouldn't ever go as far as saying I've got loads of time, you know, but I've got time to, I may have put a patch in already, but even if I haven't, I've got time to pop a patch in whilst the rig's going in. I can look at some colors, you know, I all of that sort of thing I can do as the rig is going up, as the set is being built around me. But yeah, every show in the TV world, my numbers almost become irrelevant almost, because I'm working with groups so much. And I'll just take whatever numbers are thrown at me in the morning.
Oh, fair enough.
The theatre world is very different. Very different.
I mean, I echo the fixture number idea, right? You want your fixture number. I have all of the influence on the fixture numbers. The people that I work with don't give a crap they don't care what the numbers are, as long as when they want that light, it turns on, and whatever it's called, they'll call it whatever number it is. I tend to be consistent, and then if I work with the same people over and over again, right, you learn that, okay, cool, the 300 series is the 500 series is the 600 series are the VLs or whatever we have. But as far as numbering, I mean, I'm going to echo, I think, what everyone here has said a little bit. It's like, for someone who works with numbers as a living, I'm terrible at remembering numbers. Like, I don't like doing it. So for me, everything is visual. I mean, it's just, that's one of the things actually I particularly like about EOS is I could fit so much information on a screen. I can make it as small as I want to read. So I can fit a lot of direct selects on a screen. So I not only have, my color presets. I mean, yes, they're organized in a logical number fashion, as are my effects, but, I'm just poking the button on the screen that has the red coloring to it. I'm not remembering that palette 201 is my generic red, for example. And I'm also I think echo kind of what Colin said, is like, I'm the king of the one channel group, man. Like, a light comes in, I just make a group for it because I want to be able to push the button. It's like the new light, because that's how in my world, that's how it's going to get called. Like, oh, like take that new light we put out at the left window and turn it on. It's like that one,
Light 17.
And then a lot of,
yes, that's true.
Yeah, it just like, put it on a box, and then I don't have to worry about it, because you can be good about it all you want, but there's no way when if you're dealing with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of lights, you can remember every single channel number as quickly as you can do that, right? Whether it's on a magic sheet or a layout view or a plot view or a direct select tile, whatever it is, like, tools are there. Like, I use the visual aids, and I'm proud of it. It's, someone once described to me as McDonald's programming. It's like, I'll take one of these and one of these in red over there, please. Thank you. Great. You have touchscreens. Let's use them.
Absolutely.
I have to agree with that, because with all those plots and magic sheets available, this is also more and more, because we're looking at something visual, so it's obviously for me also something which I programmed visual in a way. But I know some people, and Colin knows him as well. Michael Myler, for example, he's totally the type machine guy. He knows his group numbers, he knows his color numbers and everything, and he's just like typing like the person at the cashier desk in a store, and he's like totally fast with that. But this is it's also okay if you know your stuff, and if you always tend to know these stuff. When I'm doing media server programming, for example, I also work a bit like that, because I know my base setting is like beam 1. So if I select a layer and go beam 1, I know I find all my basic settings right in there. So that's even faster, because I don't need to move my hand from the keyboard up to the screen. But I always have been the visual programming guy, and I love it.
I don't know if you guys find the same thing when you're doing a show and you'll prepare in advance so many groups and all possibilities that you expect you're going to need and blah blah blah. And as you go, of course, you're adding more groups in. But when you start settling into it, you start to realize, okay, yeah, I've pressed those groups a handful of times. I've pressed that one, and that one like 1,000 times already, you know. Well, for me, you know, those groups straight on, speaking from a hog point of view, they're straight onto 3 command keys. It's like I'm using them all the time. So straight away onto command keys. And then it's just one press. I don't even have to look for it. It's just, I know exactly where it is on the front panel. And I'll still have my groups window open and I'm still selecting groups from the screen. But I always find I settle into finding that there are just a small group of groups that I am selecting continuously. And so, yeah, they get popped straight onto command keys.
Cool. One quick little question that's come in. On a studio narrative, sort of episodical features, how do you manage different sets? Are they on different queue lists, different show files? What's your approach? David, I'm guessing that's largely aimed at you, but I'm keen to know how you would handle that.
Yeah, different queue lists. Each set is going to have a different queue list. And then you just record the stuff that belongs to that set into that queue list. And it's just about keeping yourself organized. There are tools in EOS to help you. You know, there's filtering and stuff like that you can use to help make sure that stuff goes where it belongs. And then the nice thing is once, you know, ideally if you're dealing with a whole bunch of sets and you know the channels that are going to go in those sets right off the bat, if you put them in at some base level in your Q1, for example, then that queue list owns it. So then if you're changing a whole bunch of different sets all at once, you know, you hit update, everything's going to go back to the list that owns it. So it's a very quick way that once you get everything set, if you kind of inform each list what channel it owns, and there isn't any overlap, and you know, any overlap there, it's going to go back to where it comes with floor package lights and stuff that's getting moved around set to set. You know, you need to make sure you put it in the correct list where it's going to go. But you know, if there wasn't a little bit for you, if the just did everything for you, you know, you couldn't charge so much.
Fair enough. So moving in a slightly different direction. We've seemed to be quite TV focused at the moment. How different do you find? Have you done work on sort of feature films and that sort of shoot? And how different is that work and that workflow? Because my understanding from the conversations that I've had, and I've only ever been on one film set as a sort of lighting person, it is a completely different world. It's everything you know, but different.
I mean, does anyone else have an opinion? I'll chime in, but I don't want to keep talking here if anyone else has a thought. You know, features and narrative TV are not all that different. You know, certain, like all, you know, anything narrative is going to be different than anything live or sequentially playback based. But you know, features are about record keeping. It's about keeping it all together. I'll use different show files more often in a feature, right? Because a lot of times the whole stage is turning over a lot more in a feature. So, you know, this show file may be the cave set, and then it turns over into the cathedral set, and then it turns over into something else. Or you're on location, and you know, you have a location file, and they're all based. And you know, then in a feature, it becomes about, if you're breaking out into these multiple sets, migrating the color data and migrating the data, because they don't, you know, your boss doesn't care what show file you're on. They want that awesome lavender that they set 3 weeks ago. They want to bring that back, and they don't care what show file you're on. But no, it's all about record keeping. Just as far as, again, for a feature, you know, a lot of times the term limits are not as long, right? So, you know, I'm not going to be, you know, if I'm doing a TV show, maybe, you know, 8 months later, I need to go back and reshoot something from 8 months ago. And typically your features aren't quite that long. But you still need to be able to pass the show off and have a second unit come in and shoot something, or have a, you know, an insert unit come in, or you need to go back and reshoot something. It's all about record keeping. You know, even if it's just like, hey, you know, I get this a lot on my current show because we're using a lot of colors on my current show. It's like, hey, like, you remember when we did this? Like, what color were we using on the backlight when we were on that location? Because we want to use it on stage here because we're doing an insert of him, lighting a cigarette. So it's like, okay, I need to be able to find that information quickly. I don't, narrative is narrative, and it's just how many, they're very similar in my opinion.
Okay.
Definitely different than live TV.
Yeah. Colin or Mark, are you?
I mean, I'd just say from a, I don't do film work. That's not sort of an area that I find myself in. So much in the TV and sort of light entertainment world, game shows and that sort of thing. There's so much emphasis when I'm setting up a show. There's so much emphasis on the gameplay side that almost dominates. The look. We know we're going to need to build a really lovely look for the studio. And then rounds will have some variation and of course all the different triggers, but there's so much emphasis on the gameplay and a lot of communication with the people running and who are ultimately going to be running the game and sending all the MIDI triggers to the console, and huge amount of time gets spent on all of that, and it's almost working out the puzzle in your head of how this is all going to work as these notes are coming flying into the console, and that very, very different world from how I would imagine working on a film to be. So I think there's a stark difference there, certainly.
I mean, the one thing that was very different to me in the small little forays that I've made into film and TV is the language is completely different. So, I mean, I remember being on my first film shoot, and you build the look, and the DOP says, "Great, can you reduce that by 2 stops?" Sure. Say when. You pull things down. And eventually you start to learn the language. Do you find that there's this sort of terminology that you've come across that hasn't been anywhere else? I mean, I remember we filmed 42nd Street when that got filmed. The DOP there was talking to us in degrees. So he was saying, "Oh, that's going to be, we need to knock 90 off that, or we need to knock 180 off that." And that's going back, dug into that a little bit, and that's going right back to sort of film where they were sort of adjusting shutter rotations on cameras and things like that. So that was that reference. How is that sort of, have you sort of come across much of that where you've sort of been asked to do things and you're like, what's that mean?
I guess I'm quite lucky that the DPs I'm working with most of the times, most of them come from also the entertainment industry background, so they really talk more like percentage and directly, okay, make it a little warmer, make it a little colder, or I need like 100 Kelvin colder or something like that. So it's quite the terms and terminology, which is quite the standard at the moment, or what physical stuff is used, and also what the console is telling me, because a lot of them used to work as programmers before, so they know what the console is showing us as a programmer. So I'm quite happy in that term. And about the feature films, so I was also lucky that I only need to program media servers at that point. And there it's quite easy because it's a specific clip which needs to run at a specific time, and so it's even easier to reproduce situations like that for media servers because it's a LED wall or a projector doing something, and that was easy to keep record.
Great.
Yeah. I mean, stops.
David, yeah.
I mean, I've never gotten the degrees before. That's a new one to me. But I started in lighting. I was a DP for a hot second. Like stops are fairly, I'm used to that, right? It's easy on linear LED fixtures, right? Because a stop is the halving or doubling a light, so you could figure that out linearly, right? 50% is a stop because you're halving a light on a linear curve LED fixture, for example. A lot of times they'll say a stop, they don't mean a stop. They want to bring down what looks like a stop, and you kind of know what that looks like, and you know, a lot of times I'll do kind of, definitely, I think you were absolutely right. A lot of times you'll be like, how's that? Like, yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
You know, I do a lot of like, how's that? That good? Oh, a little more down. Oh, cool. That's great. You know, and you end up at 72.5% or whatever. But, you know, there's just a lot of like lighting by feel sort of stuff. Oh, my son has something to say.
Cool.
So, yeah.
How much are you finding previs creeping into your world? Do you have to do a lot of sort of pre-production in previs, or do you do everything on set?
Was that to any one particular person?
Well, let's start with you. It was a general to everyone, and you kindly volunteered and stepped up. So we'll start with you.
So for me, in the TV world, very little actually. It's all done when we're there. There's been, you know, the lighting director will have created models, of course, but actual programming with previs. For the sorts of shows that I do, it's generally done. You know, we do it in the studio. For me, previs is far more useful in the corporate and the theatre world. Again, the sorts of theatre shows I end up doing, there's very, very little time on site. We're certainly not sitting there going, "Ooh, let's have a little play with this." You know, it's got to go in pretty fast, and so I'll have a huge amount of previs done for those. Same with the corporate. I mean, they go in even faster. So, but for the sorts of TV work that I have been doing, very, very minimal.
Okay.
With for the vid.
Cool. Mark's just paying attention to his gig that he's on at the moment. David, how about you?
You know, I'll use previs occasionally. It's, you know, I think Augmented has kind of changed the amount that I'll use previs. I know it's not a previs program or whatever, but, you know, we all know how that, but yeah. But, you know, the big problem with previs, especially in narrative, is that any pre-visualization software, you know, it doesn't understand soft light. So it's great. You know, I did a Joel Cohen movie. It was a you know, a version of Macbeth, Denzel Washington and all that. It was all hard light, moving lights and stuff like that. And, you know, they wanted to see, you know, previs these lights through windows and custom gobos they were going to order and all this stuff. And Augmented was great for that because you could show them that it was all hard light. You know, but then you start turning on, well, we've got these soft boxes full of sky panels and they've got full grid under them. And then they've got control grids. And it's like, no previs really understands diffusion or bounce light very well. So a lot of times, you know, sometimes I'll use it as a dog and pony show to impress the boss. You know, everyone likes to see a sexy render with their name on it, but practically speaking, unless I use it a lot. Like I've done some commercials that have been like Christmas commercials, and it's big moving light shows and a lot of pixel stuff. And then we'll do it, you know, we'll previs it all. It'll be 100% previs and it's all time coded and all that sort of stuff. But I'd say prevising something is the exception rather than the rule.
Okay. Touching on you gave me quite a good segue there, David. Thank you. So, you know, talking about sort of the spectacles and those kind of things, something that's become more prevalent recently, I think, in TV is what I would call eye candy, the sort of stuff that happens in the background that just sort of twinkles and fills the shot. And I know from working in TV that it's coming from theatre at least and moving into TV, the hardest thing for me to stop doing is looking at the stage and actually remembering to look at the monitors to what the million people are going to be seeing as opposed to the 50 people who are sitting in the studio are seeing. And one of those things when that's a big area is the sort of eye candy stuff, because it tends to run at really low levels. I find that, you know, so it doesn't blow out camera. Any sort of tips and tricks as to how you manage that? Do you sort of program at a higher level and then pull it down on a master? What's your sort of approach to dealing with those kinds of things? Colin, I mean, I'll pick you.
Go in there. I mean, I'll go first. Yeah, go ahead, Colin. Go ahead.
All I was going to say is, in terms of sort of looking at the right place, I mean, once we once we've roughed in a few looks, we are off the floor. You know, we are in the gallery, and there's no doubt as to where we're looking, because if we're not looking at the monitors, we can't see anything at all. So that makes that very easy. There's no distraction of. I think it'd be even harder actually to light for television if you were on the studio floor with your monitors, because you would be seeing two things all the time. Once you're in the gallery, you've got your monitors and that's it. So long as your cameramen are looking, you're good. And yeah, you know, the intensity is something that you've really got to keep your eye on, because you rough it in on the studio floor, you can probably bet your life you're going to have to dial it back when you see it on camera. If it's eye candy and it's coming right into the lens, you're going to have to dial it back. So you anticipate that, of course, when you're roughing it in, and with experience, you can start to sort of gauge. You know, always sort of err on the side of caution and sort of dial it back a little bit from what you would do probably if you were lighting it for the eye. So yeah, but I always find myself, even, you know, still once you're looking on camera, just pulling things back a little bit. But certainly, from what you were saying of the sort of the where to look kind of thing, that's never an issue for me. I'm always totally out of the way, probably further away from the studio floor than I would like, and sometimes.
Cool. David, how about you?
I mean, I don't know. You kind of get a hang of what's going to look good on camera. You know, oh, we want to light the 45-foot candles. Okay, cool. Like, that's kind of what this looks like. I don't pay attention to what's on stage at all. I only look at the monitor. You know, I mean, you know what they call it? You know what they call an audience in television? Set dressing. You know, no one cares what it looks like for the audience. It doesn't matter. It matters what it looks like for the people watching at home, whether it's narrative or whether it's a live production or anything like that. Yeah, I mean, I just judge it 100% off the monitor, and I'll bake that in. You know, and you kind of, I mean, the number of lights on my current show that I have running at 1%, 0.5%. You know, it just, the cameras have gotten so sensitive. I mean, you're shooting at, you know, 640, 1200 ISO. I mean, you know, my current show, you know, they rate it 1600 ISO. I mean, that's basically shooting in the dark. You walk into the set, oh my God, it's so dark. And then you look at the monitor and it looks great. So you can't judge it by eye, you know, and, you know, your boss can, because he's got a light meter, and you kind of learn what works. But, you know, every light I bring up now, you know, if I bring up a Scott, you know, any light that I start now, they bring in a new light, I start at 20%. And a lot of times that's too bright. Whether it's a key light or, you know, certainly I know that looking at it, that's going to be too bright. But, yeah, I don't, you know, I'll run in HIBs and stuff to sometimes keep that down. But, you know, if you're doing a non-linear playback show, like what Colin and Mark are talking about, I'm calling it non-linear because a lot of times you'll record them non-linearly, but then you'll play them back linearly. You can kind of get hosed if in a rehearsal you set in the HIB for this one song and then you go back and then the HIB's not in the right spot, you know. So you can handle that with macros or whatever. But there's a bunch of ways to do it, I guess. I didn't answer the question. Mark.
Cool. Hey, Mark, you're back. I don't know if you caught that. We were just chatting about eye candy and balancing levels for cameras, and if you had any sort of tricks and tips that you use.
No, the only thing is, like, you need to be aware that, and what I heard as well is, like, that it's totally different from the eye, and that it's really matter only for the people sitting in front of the television. And it's something I really, when I started doing this, it's something I really needed to learn, because I tend to look on stage and it was looking good there, and then I look first time on the monitor, I was like, this is not what I see here on stage. So it's really a learning curve, and how different cameras behave when it comes to colors. You know, it's totally different if you have a red camera compared to whatever the Sony studio camera, Panasonic or whatever. They all behave different, and it's really important that you needed like a good first cameraman or a DP who also knows about these things and can take care of that, so that you as an operator can be safe, that you don't need to take care of that as well. So that's really which helps me as a programmer a lot. If there's the first cameraman who is taking care of these things, that all the cameras are match good, and also when it comes to those eye candy stuff, when we do, for example, live music recordings, we also want to transport the live view for the people then later watching that DVD or that recording, and there you have to work in a totally different way than if you do a normal TV recording. So it's always to keep the balance when you, for example, record a live concert. Then you still have to do the show for the people in the venue, and then it's really hard to keep that balance often between what you see on the monitor and what you want to do for the people which are in the audience watching the show and paid actually for watching that show. So it's sometimes a big split of the opinions.
Right. I mean, I would think that with LED becoming more and more commonplace, it's actually probably made things slightly easier because, you know, David, you were saying that your sort of starting intensity is 20%. With LED, at least your color is consistent more or less through that sort of dimming range. So if that was a tungsten fixture, the 20% is going to be a completely different color that renders out on the other side to anything else. And do you find that LED has made the job easier, or I mean, is it how much of an impact has LED had on what you do?
I think it makes some stuff easier, but also some stuff more difficult because you have to be aware of batches of fixes when fixes have been produced, especially when it comes to smaller lightings like small cars replacements, like typical LED wash lights for making some nice looks in the background, which are not moving lights or so. And there you really have to be aware getting the same batch, especially when it comes to the blues. You definitely see always, this is made from a different batch than that one sometimes. But it made life easier when it comes especially when using moving lights with white LED engines, because you don't have these problems with having bulbs getting green or brown and stuff like that. So this definitely improved. It's just you have more consistent level of light quality coming out of a moving light.
David, how about you?
I think, for like key lighting and stuff, I think it's definitely made it easier. A lot of LEDs, especially ones made for film and television, will hold their color fairly well as they dim. There are some that do it better than others. I think that, LED dimming, moving lights with LED dimming engines are great. The problem with some of the the camera being so sensitive now is you run into problems with moving lights where, we got those sexy looking beams, but we're shooting at 1600 ISO. You dim a moving light to 20%, you're going to get a lot of times you'll get a color shift. You'll either get it from the dowser or you'll get it from the framing shutters. The color will shift one way or the other. So at least with like an LED output engine that will dim, the color stays consistent there and you're not subject to, or you'll see, like a Sharpie, like you'll physically see the dowser in the beam. So you don't have to deal with a lot of that stuff. I found it generally easier. I find that it's interesting because you're having color conversations now a lot more than we used to. And I think it's important for programmers to have an understanding of color and how color works and what fixtures can make what colors and what can't. Like, it's just a lot of times it's like, make that color. And it's like, I just can't make that color. I'm trying. And it's like, I know you see that color by eye, but like you look on camera, it's like, I can't, like, we're mixing it on the monitor. Like, I just can't hit that color on the monitor because this only has 3 chips in it, because of the wavelengths of the LEDs, because of the LUT you've applied. Right now a hero on my current show is this, special medium lavender. It's a lavender color, but you look on camera and it's blue because of the LUT they're using. So we'll make it, make it a really saturated red. Well, you can't make it a really saturated because your LUT is taking out a lot of the color. So there's like all these delicate balances now where a lot of times cameramen think they have infinite options and they're still limited by the technology, just in a different way.
Colin, how about you? Have you found it's made an impact on things for you?
I think that it's definitely, to say, with what Mark was saying about consistency across fixtures, it's helped that enormously. But it does make, if you just want a very delicate, very subtle little background eye candy twinkle, when you're right down at low levels, that can become a lot more challenging, I think, with LED to get something looking really, really smooth, unless you've got, you know, really good fixtures. You can run into trouble if you've been given some, which maybe the bottom end isn't so smooth. Just wanted to jump back. Something that David said really made me, suddenly took my mind back to, I think, the first question, or one of the first questions today, which was the difference between, you know, moving maybe from theatre into the television world. And I think colour is one of the key things there. Colour on camera versus colour to the eye is just chalk and cheese. And getting a grip on that and getting a handle on how not just colour works in TV, but different cameras, how colour works, you know, it's vastly different. You know, you can walk off one TV set onto another one and the colours are, everything's just, you know, that is something that I myself found, kind of having spent years and years and years of just pleasing my eye or the lighting designer's eye, to having to really, really understand colour. You know, that it's very, very different. And that was one of the biggest challenges I myself found.
You know, Colin, a funny story about that is I took over Bebop from, they'd shot one episode before I came on with another programmer. They shot it, and then John Cho broke his knee doing a stunt, and they had to go down for a year, and that's how I ended up picking it up from there. So I inherited a show file, and I kind of beaten it into submission, but they had a bunch of colors in there. But during the downtime, they had changed cameramen, they changed cameras, they had changed camera systems and changed the LUT they were using. So we came back to do the camera test and like, well, none of these colors are right. And again, you like, it's a computer. Like, I don't know what to tell you. Like, the colors are right in the world. None of these colors are correct. And it's like, well, the color output is correct, but it didn't look the same on camera because the different color system, different, you're using a different LUT, different DIT, different, like all this stuff. And they're trying to match this reference footage and it's not matching. So you end up rebuilding all these colors to match what they had already shot, even though the math was the same in the console. So, I mean, to your point, like, it's all dependent on the camera system that you're using and the processing that's happening to that camera downstream, right? Like, you are just one step in the process. You are not the final step in the process. We've done some stuff in this where, you know, we're shooting against green screen and they can't decide what color they want to do. So we're using white light. You know, they're going through space and they're doing all these whatever. And they're like, well, it's supposed to be yellow, but maybe we don't want a yellow. So we did it all with white light, and they're going to just color the light later in visual effects. Mm-hmm. You know, it's a strange new world we're living in.
I actually recently worked on a show which was completely green screen, virtual 3D studio space. You know, it was a fascinating environment to be in because we ended up actually we kept the lighting so simple because everything we tried to do was having such an impact on what the 3D world guys, you know, with Disguise were trying to do, and, you know, throwing sensors off and throwing the key off, and, you know, it was so we ended up changing so very little. And the response was, yeah, they'll do that in post. They'll do it in post, because everything we tried to change had such a knock-on effect that was causing time delays for them to rekey, or, you know, it was quite an eye-opener. It was my first experience in that environment where it was, you know, not just green screen, but with all of the camera tracking and everything for the 3D studio. It was fascinating, but we had to really strip it down, and rely on a lot of things being done in post.
So a couple of questions come in that I want to bounce out to everyone. First one is from Troy. Do you have your own console, or do you and or rig, you know, gear that you take on with you? Do you charge separately for the use of that? Are you expected as a programmer to have your own kit that you turn up on site with? Is there a standard / what's your practice? Colin, since you're still centered on my screen, I'm going to straight back to you.
So yeah, it's interesting. For quite a few years, I done a lot of console rentals, and my consoles are going out on TV shows left, right, and center. Usually, not so much at the moment, but they're kept pretty busy in the TV world. Only once have I ever used my own console on a TV show.
Okay.
Because they're normally out on other stuff, and then I will be asked to go and cover someone on a TV show, and it's whichever consoles. I very rarely do I end up renting my own kit to my own shows.
Same for me. Same for me. I also own some consoles, but on the TV shows or any stuff like that, I don't take them with me. It's more like when I go touring with artists and like music events, then I probably it's quite often that I have my own gear with me. But for when I do TV shows, I have some small helpers for which I always take some splitters for audio, timecode splitting, to connect them into the intercom, little preamps, speakers and stuff like that. That's always in my toolbox, but it's not the console. But I always go then with a lot of USB sticks with different software versions and stuff like that. But not with but quite. It's more for events when I'm asked to do like corporate events or so. Often designers or rental companies want me as an operator or as a lighting director, and they don't care what type of console it's going to be used for that event. So they just go, okay, bring whatever you like. And do you have your own? Oh, yeah, okay, bring it and put it on the invoice. So it's definitely always then an extra point on the invoice. So it's not included in my daily charge that I'm paying a console.
David, how about you for the stuff you do? Do you come lock, stock, and barrel?
I bought a Geo when they first came out, and I'm now up to 6 lighting consoles, 4 of them being EOS consoles of some sort. I found it a very good business move. Most, at least in Los Angeles, most of us will own our own consoles. I only program on my own consoles. It's a condition of employment for me. And I have a company, and they rent it from my company. And we have some nodes, and we have all the doodads and this and that and the other thing. And the argument is, if you want to hire me, you want me to bring my toolkit that I'm comfortable in. You want me to use my tools, and it's at least in Los Angeles, it is it's fairly common. We call the programmer, and we don't care what console. Generally speaking, we don't care what console it's on. We just want the person, because it's about the person, right? It's not about the desk. And so, it's a condition of employment for me, and it's a separate deal that I negotiate with production, and they pay for it separately from my daily rate. It's not linked, but it's something else that we have to work out before I go into a job.
What I would say, I've just remembered a second show where I did end up sitting down behind one of my desks on a TV show. So it was 2, but again, in contrast for me, any corporate show and theatre show for me, it's always my own consoles. It's strangely, it only seems to be the TV shows where I end up hardly ever behind my own kit. But yeah, I lit right when Hog 4 first came out. I was doing a musical out in Wellington in New Zealand, and they really didn't want to. At that point there were no Hog 4s at all in New Zealand. I was going to be programming the show myself, so I was very adamant that I wanted it to be a Hog 4, and the discussions ended up coming down to it's going to be me doing this on a Hog 4, in which case you need to get a Hog 4 out there, or I'm not interested in doing this show because I'm going to have my hands tied so much that they ended up at great expense flying a couple of my hogs out there to New Zealand. So that worked well for me in the end. But yeah, in that scenario, I very much said, if I'm going to go and do the show, like David said, it needs to be with tools that I'm competent with, that I'm comfortable, that it's not going to become an anchor for me getting the best out of the show.
Cool.
Yeah, I mean, I'm in Auckland right now, and they flew 20 cases of my gear from Los Angeles, and it's just like that's the the cost of doing business, and it's becoming more of a standard, at least in what I'm seeing. I'm talking with folks like Ryan Phillips, like who's a trainer out in New York who does the Daily Show and stuff. It doesn't sound like it's as common in New York, for example, so certain markets, but the markets that I'm exposed to or that I participate in, yeah, it's preconditioned.
Speaking on LUT, how deeply into camera mechanics and LUT software do you all get, or do you just leave it up to the DP or the gaffer?
I mean, there's someone who's
Don't get deep into that.
There's a lot of me. Right? Sorry, Colin. Go ahead.
Oh no, well, mine will be really quick. I tend not to get deeply involved in that world. On a TV show, there's going to be 2 lighting operators. For me, my role is very much more always the moving lights and the gameplay side, and I'll take my instructions from the lighting director. I'll rough looks in, but take sort of the fine lighting direction from the lighting director. I don't personally get overly involved in the camera side.
Yeah, same for me. There are people above me and who get even paid more to take care of that stuff. so I can focus on my programming.
Fair enough. David, how about you? I suspect it's reasonably important in your world.
Yeah, I mean, I have a close relationship with I'm usually with the DIT in the tent or at the monitor with the DP and the gaffer, and we work together. But there's someone who's paid to manage the look of the show, and it's not me. It's the DIT, and they deal with it with the DP. And to me, it's just again, because I have a little bit of a camera background too, and understanding LUTs I think are important, because you need to understand what you can and can't do. Again, like on my current show, all of the red is taken out, so it's like there's certain colors I just can't mix on camera because of the LUT. But I'm not going to tell them to change it. I just think that when you say, well, why can't you make that color? And you're like, I don't know, it's full red diode and it doesn't look red. Like, I don't know if that is, and understanding what that is, and then working with the DIT to mitigate that, to keep the look of the show consistent, but maybe they can dial some of the red in to get the look that they want. You can have a back and forth, but that's not my purview.
Questions coming from Mike. How do you manage the ever-growing wireless floor packages with the ever-growing multi-cell control? Given the limitations of universes, any interference for wireless stuff, etc. Is there a sort of best practice that you sort of fall back on? Colin, I'll come to you again, just because I like picking on you first. There we go.
I'm going to be really quick with this. I have used wireless so little. I really have just so infrequently had the need for wireless. I mean, I've had a few wireless uplighters and cans on a couple of trucks that were moving on and off, but so infrequently that I feel I've got so little to offer to this question.
Okay.
We plug stuff in.
Mark, how about you?
Yeah, quite a mixture. Because I had more problems when it comes to touring, because a lot of the arenas, they quite often have like public Wi-Fi's, and a lot of the communication of that stuff is happening in the 5 gigahertz band, so it's quite often that you're limited to certain channels, and it's more and more important that not just in the world of like sound guys, where you have a frequency management or people taking care of frequency management, it's when you have larger setups, it's even more important there that you know about these things, that you can scan those things and then can also configure your setup in a not also then use manually configuration where you bound your gear to a specific channel which is free, which is not used by the Wi-Fi or the public Wi-Fi in the venue. So and then I always kept good results in using wireless systems, and I don't tend to use any cheap stuff. It's more like, especially when it comes to wireless, the more you pay for it, the better the quality gets.
David, is wireless a big thing in your?
Oh yeah. I mean, I feel like this could be another 45-minute conversation, so I'll try not to make it that. But I mean, as far as management, I think there's 2 parts to that question. As far as management, for a floor package, I'll allocate a certain number of universes for our floor package. So let's say our floor packages, universes, 1 through 3, and then we'll have a dedicated universes 9 and 10 or 8, 9, and 10 for wireless. So like that'll be all our Asteras and things that are only wireless, AX5s and all that sort of stuff that's purely wireless. And then, we'll just carry out however many transmitters we need. So, I would always prefer wired if possible. But, a lot of times I found that the Lumen radio, like the FX units, are really great because you can plug them in and they can pull down whatever streaming ACN feed they need off the network. So, we'll carry dual universe FX units and we'll plug it in, and you just first unit rolls in, you plug it in, and all of a sudden your Asteras or whatever on those universes are plugged in. It's about making it plug and play. Managing main unit and the ballooning of main unit with multi-cell fixtures, that's kind of a separate question. Figuring out what you need pixel control over and what you don't. Like I found that Titans are great, but 4 pixels is usually enough. I don't typically need 16 pixels, even if I'm doing chases. Like 4 pixels is enough to get the idea across. And it saves you a bunch of time. But if you're using like SkyPanel 360s, for example, I'll run those in, mode 24, which is, it's, their full 12 cell mode, because a lot of times it's a key light, but sometimes it's a fire effect and you can't be jumping back and forth. And how do you manage that? And a lot of times I'll put that on I'll run those will come with their own loom that have power and network cable. And I'll have someone plug that directly into a switch instead of a node. And then it doesn't matter how many parameters it takes up because it's on its own universe, or, there's a whole host of ways to manage that. As far as managing wireless spectrum, which got touched on a little bit, I mean, no one's got a good solution, right? It's an arms race right now. Everyone's like, oh, I'm going to get a bigger antenna and higher broadcast power, and it's a mess. And no one has a good solution. And, the majority of high-end wireless DMX is still in the 2.4 gigahertz range. That's where the remote focus units and the remote iris units for camera live. That's where a lot of the sound stuff lives. You just have to be partners with other departments and try to be good when you can. That's what's, again, like the FX units I like because I can log in. There's a program called Supernova that Lumen Radio puts out where I can come in and I can actually turn on and off what bands I'm frequently hopping around to try to be a good neighbor. And then you have the video wireless solutions of like the Teradeks of the world, and that's a whole other nightmare. And everyone's got their Wi-Fi, and I've got the Wi-Fi for my tablet. It's like just trying to be a good neighbor to everybody. But right now, every now and then you'll have a department come on that'll manage it. We have an IT department on this that's trying to coordinate all that. But a lot of times it's up to the most knowledgeable wireless person in the room. And if you're a programmer, especially in film and TV, and you're not up on wireless and how it works, not just wireless DMX, but Wi-Fi and all that frequency stuff, you should read about it because it's coming and it's coming in hot and everyone wants it. And no one notices it until it doesn't work. And then they don't understand why it doesn't work. And you have to be able to ready to mitigate that. And I always make it known early on. It's like, I'd rather be wired. We can go wireless all you want. It's great. But like, I make this expression known right off the bat of like, wired is the preferred operating method. And if it's in the rig, it's absolutely wired. So you're not the 45-minute, only the 44-minute explanation.
That was really good. Thank you. So we've had a question come in from Lewis. And this is potentially a rabbit hole, so I don't want to go down, get too far down there, but I feel we have to touch on it because it's been the past year for everyone. How do you find the pandemic has sort of affected your industry, the way you have to work? Have has it been huge? Or people, is the way things done differently? Has it slowed things down, sped things up? How's it sort of impacted your world?
For me, it was a completely total shutdown still, because I mostly was working in live industry and corporate events. So it's just little coming back as I'm sitting actually at the moment here right now in front of console doing a little show for the Ice OK stream. But what I see directly or where we made a large step forward is all the extended reality or 3D world camera tracking stuff. So that, which was kind of like a really special thing happening. There had been done very, very huge steps, and you can even do with smaller stuff setups. For example, maybe some of you have seen what Amir Cohen has done with the LH and some NDI streams in it. He posted that on his Facebook page. And this is just a visualizer and sending 2 or 3 camera streams in via NDI. And I think this has made a big impact on our industry, what is possible there, which had been, I think, which would have come for sure, but maybe not that fast. And I also like looking at augmented, which what ETC was doing with augmented. This is definitely something where I can see more and more things popping up on base of augmented. This is because what we have right there is just, for me, I think it's just the first step. It's not, we're not just even run 10 meters on that 100-meter short track races. We will maybe just get up from the after the first 1 or 2 meters, and we have a lot of things popping up, I guess.
David, how have you found working practices? Have things changed drastically for you?
In LA, I shut down for about 4 months, and then I went back and finished the feature I was on. And then I was very fortunate, and then I was probably I did a job here or there for the next month, and then I was very fortunate. I shipped off to New Zealand, where we're very fortunate that there is very little COVID. So a lot of times we're working just as normal. But I mean, God, I hated working under COVID protocols. I mean, I was programming. You got the mask, and then you got the face shield, and then you're hand sanitizing all the time, and you gotta, and you're supposed to keep 6 feet from people, but of course the gaffer wants to come up and lean over your shoulder and talk to you, or you're trying to, and then the actors come on and everyone's got to clear a path, and there's like, everyone's doing their best. I mean, I was getting tested when I was working in LA. I was getting tested 5 days a week. I was getting tested every day. And then, and we were with the rapid tests, so we would find out, we'd get tested in a couple, so we would need 2 negative tests to go to work, and then you would get tested every day. And then like actors and people who were working without masks were getting tested 7 times a week. So they were getting the brain ticklers twice a week. And it was broken out into zones, and there's a whole zone system. And there's an interesting white paper if anyone wants to read it. It's called The Way Forward, that SAG put out early on. SAG and DGA put out, and it outlines a lot of the Hollywood protocols and what they recommend and what they're using. It's definitely a new world, and I hate working in a mask. I feel like I'm in this, a mask and a face shield. I feel like I'm in a space suit. Between that, and then you've got the radio in one ear, and you got the HME in the other ear, and you are disconnected from reality completely. It stinks, but it's, at least in LA, it's very busy. I'm happy that at least film and television seems to be getting back to work, because I think everyone's reached the bottom of Netflix. So there's a demand for content.
Brilliant. Colin, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, I had when all this started off last March, I had a 4-month pause with nothing. Then there was a brief resurgence, and things got busy again. I was working, doing a fair bit of TV for sort of up to the beginning of December. Then things got tightened up again. A lot of productions got cancelled again. And the TV world is definitely getting back on its feet now, but it's still, from my point of view, things have stayed quite quiet in the very, very light entertainment. That I think people have been rather cautious. A lot of TV has carried on throughout this, but not the sorts of things that I was doing. So things have been very, very quiet for me. But in that brief period between sort of August and the beginning of December, where I was doing a fair bit of TV work, again, there was a lot of testing, there was a lot of restrictions for working, which everyone, of course, understood. But the one show which sort of really brought it home when we were doing the MTV Awards, and the whole green screen environment again, we had to be tested. We had to go outside the studio, have our test, go and sit in our cars, wait for, I think it was about 3 or 4 hours. I had to wait in the car before I was allowed to come in. Such a bizarre situation. But then when we were working, we had this 3D environment of this huge arena, and you've got the the band on stage who are presenting, and they're being told, you know, girls, remember when this airs, you're in an arena with a load of screaming fans. So, you know, and we were in a pretty chilly, empty studio, you know, that it was such a bizarre scenario. I mean, of course, in the film world, people are in completely different environments after all the CGI anyway. But it was very unique for all of us working in that environment. And, you know, I think it's going to be much better when we have real audiences back, that's for sure.
Absolutely. So last thing, we're sort of close on time. I'll just do a quick round robin for everyone. Your top sort of, your favorite trick or a tip or a best little, you know, thing that you do that makes your life easier on a shoot. What would you say your sort of top tip is that you could impart with someone? And it's a rotten question, and I don't know who to pick first because people usually like to have a few seconds to think about that. So I'll waffle on for a little bit while you sort of give that a bit of thought.
I can chuck one in for that if you want.
Yeah, okay, go on then.
So again, sort of taking it from sort of my angle of the sort of TV stuff that I do, it's preparing, you know, before you've even got cameras up and running and before you can even see what anything's going to look like, probably even before you've got control of the rig, get an understanding of what is required and get a framework in, you know, get rough stuff in, because the moment those cameras are on, things move fast, really fast. So being prepared is crucial. And this comes back to what David was saying, you know, massive argument for having that base show file and having so much stuff that you can call on. In a world where sort of so many things are, you know, everything's just so different, where, you know, Mark and myself have sort of come to the conclusion that we're okay to start a new show if, you know, but we need to be prepared. So in that time, whilst the cameras aren't running, we don't have the rig yet, make sure you're talking to the gaming guys, understand exactly what the gameplay is. And I'll get all of my lists in, I'll get all of my little comment macros in for connecting my incoming notes to particular lists. Get all of that framework in. They don't have to have any values in them. Just get all of that working, because then when the cameras are on and you start looking at things, like I say, it goes so fast. You get that note come in, you're right, okay, that happens now. Okay, chuck something into it. Doesn't even matter really. Just something rough, chuck it in. Then at least the director sitting next door, he knows you're getting it. Something's happened. You know, they're pushing that buzzer. Something's happening. He knows you're understanding. He knows you're awake. You can refine that as and when you get a moment's peace and quiet to refine it. But people understand that you're working on it. People understand that it works. The worst thing in that environment is for someone to push a buzzer and for nothing to happen. You know, because you're now thinking, oh, what note's that? Okay, right. So when that note comes in, I need to make sure that this, you know, there's no time for any of that. That could have been done before. So that would be my tip, is get all that stuff done before you even have control of your lights. And then the moment you do have control, you can just whack stuff in.
Brilliant. Thank you. David, happy to be next.
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely agree with Colin. I think it's the unsexy answer, but it's like have your structure in place before you start, right? Like, you know, I like to talk about, you know, my whole bucket idea, right? It's like you're gonna need to record stuff. Like, have a place to put it before you start. Like, have a structure in place. Have, like, you know, even if you haven't built any palettes, like, you know, you're gonna need color palettes. Like, build a snapshot with a palette view so you have some place to put it, so you're not like thinking on the fly. Oh, what palette number do I have available? How do I want to structure this? That can all be figured out ahead of time. Another thing that I do on EOS is, you know, I'll map, you know, I have my different fader pages mapped to buttons and stuff, but like I'll map blank submasters to almost every one of my faders, because then you can just say, oh, cool, record only, and then hit the load key, and it's going to load to that submaster, and you have it ready to go. Oh, cool, I need to convert that to an inhibitor. No problem, you know, that properties, and you can very quickly change that around. I need to make it a cue list, no problem. Shift, unload that, and then when you record that cue list, it's going to map to that fader because it's the next open fader. Like, little stuff to make it faster, because they're going to ask for it. They're going to ask for it now, and then they're going to roll, and then they're going to change it while you're rolling before you get to that queue. So you need to have the structure. Like, do all the knucklehead stuff ahead of time. Do all the organization stuff ahead of time. Like, you don't want to be under the gun thinking about what group number you want to use. Like, that ship has sailed by that point.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah.
Mark, how about you?
Yeah, to add what the others two said, because that's obviously one of my points as well, but I like to add one more thing in the human relationship. So get to know your DP, get to know your director, understand their way of describing things, because that's also very, very important. Because when somebody is talking about, like, yeah, put some love into that look, for example, it can mean something totally different to you than for him. You know, maybe it's for that person, it's just like a slight movement, a tilt saw or whatever, and for you it might be just like a red scene with some twinkles or whatever. So it's now have a little chat with those people what they expect from their set, because there might be a set designer who has some expectation. The director for sure has a vision how the show, how this recording should look like, and understand these things. And because this will then keep those discussions later on when it comes to details very, very short, because you understand what love means when it's talking, he or she is talking about that.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. I think that's a really good place to wrap it up. So thank you very much, Mark, David, and Colin for joining us. Kat for being there and answering all the questions and the chat. I see, David, the sun's actually come up while we've been talking, so that's a good thing for you. You got some sunrise out the back window. But yeah, thank you very much. I appreciate your time. It's been a good session. I wish you all well. Have a good weekend. Good luck with the shows and things that you're busy with. Thanks everyone for joining us for this month's episode of Light Bytes. Our next Light Bytes is on the 9th of April. It's normally the first Friday of every month, but the first Friday of April is actually Good Friday, so we've pushed it back a week. So 9th of April will be our next Light Bytes session. We'll be sending out notifications soon as to what topic we're covering. We like to keep it a surprise to the last minute. So we'll be emailing everybody soon with all those details. But yeah, thank you very much for joining us. Have a good weekend, and hope to see you all again soon.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. Have a wonderful weekend.